Hello from the Authors Guild Foundation, and welcome to Agent Talks, our series in collaboration with the Association of American Literary Agents, AALA, and Literary Agents of Change. In this series, our guest speaker is a literary agent who dishes out expertise in their particular field, and after the presentation, we have some Q&A where you can pick their brain with follow-up questions. Literary agent Jenissa Graham is here with us for Hidden Gems of Subrights, and agent Sarah Khalil will moderate a conversation. We're excited to dig into subsidiary rights. Book contracts in general are one of the most popular services we provide members of the Authors Guild. Our lawyers review them for you as part of your dues. That's included for free. If you have questions about the Guild's legal services, feel free to use the Q&A box here to send in a question. Our head of legal services, Michael Gross, is behind the scenes and can type in questions about the Guild's legal services if you're interested. And I know he's excited to hear Jenissa's insights and perspectives on subrights. Jenissa Graham is an associate agent and subsidiary rights manager at Bookend's Literary Agency, where she's actively building her list of clients while simultaneously supporting the agency in film, TV, merchandise, and audio. Her publishing career started at Writer's House, first as an intern and then full-time in the subrights department as the Global Licensing and Media Rights Assistant, where she supported the team in film, theater, merchandise, permissions, and UK rights. As a first-generation Jamaican American, Jenissa is passionate about increasing the BIPOC space in publishing and is always on the lookout for new underrepresented authors. She currently lives in New York. And Sarah Khalil, our moderator, is a literary agent and editorial manager at Calligraph. Thanks for coming back, Sarah. Previously, she was at Kneerim Williams for 4 years, and she's worked at Beacon Press and the IP law firm Sennott, Williams, and Rogers. Sarah's the director of Calligraph's internship program, and she's on the Association of American Literary Agents DEI committee and is a co-director of its mentorship program. And Sarah, I'll turn it over to you now.
Yeah, thank you, Johnny. So as Johnny said, I'm a literary agent at Calligraph, and along with being a moderator this evening, I'm also co-director of the mentorship committee within the AALA and LAOC. The mentorship committee was founded to serve historically underrepresented groups, particularly people of color in the agenting community, and seeks to increase retention and promotion. The LAOC have also recently launched the Equity Directory, a database of BIPOC literary agents created by Literary Agents of Change to help querying authors and illustrators find and connect with BIPOC agents and to foster community between BIPOC agents and their publishing peers. This panel is an opportunity offered within our year-long mentorship program, the third cycle of which has recently wrapped. And we're thrilled to see such a wonderful turnout for a member of our cohort, Jenissa Graham, as she leads this presentation on subrights. The hour will conclude with a 15-minute Q&A session. Jenissa?
All right, thanks so much, Sarah and Johnny, and just Authors Guild for having me. I'm really excited about subrights. It is really a passion of mine, so I'm excited to talk to everybody. And I believe we have a slideshow that Perfect. So yeah, I really wanted to break down subrights because one, it's a lot to overwhelm everybody with, and I know it's a big umbrella. So I wanted to really break down which subsection of subrights, what I use as manager now at Bookends, and what you guys as indie authors, traditionally published authors should be on the lookout for. Next slide. So just really a bare definition of like what are subsidiary rights. And that's really going to be cover every form of the book that is not the physical book or ebook itself. So when your agent sells your book to a publisher, it's known as that primary deal. That's when they're selling it to an Hachette, a PRH, a Simon & Schuster, even more of like, it's like a smaller press type of agency or publisher. Then when you're negotiating the deal, your agent's also able to discuss or really license certain rights. And the reason why I'll get into license a little bit more, but they're not actually selling the rights until we're getting more complicated into more like a film and TV deal. They are licensing your rights for a certain amount of time in that different facet. And so rights retained by the publisher means that they have the right to license the work on your behalf and share that revenue. But rights that your agent retains means that you don't have to share it to the publisher. So if SNS is able to keep the rights for translation, they're going to sell it in that country and split the rights with you. However, if Bookends, per se, and we retain the rights for you, we're going to be able to sell it, and they were kind of cutting out that publisher and getting more direct money into your pocket. Next slide. So Subrights is an umbrella, and I've really broken down a couple of things that really fall under the very large term of Subrights. That's going to be foreign and translation, which is usually a lot of what people see. Also UK, ANZ rights, so any different territory as well as language. Audio rights, podcast, which is probably the smallest subsection, permission and educational reprints, merchandise, theater and live stage, and film and TV. And I'll go into kind of each one. Next slide. Perfect. So permission and educational reprints. What that means, there can be a textbook company where if it's Pearson, if it's someone that wants to do, let's say, the text of your book and put in a textbook, a Norton, something like that, they can go ahead and reach out to me or your publisher and say, hey, we really like this line. We want to have it in 200,000 of our textbooks for this season. And so what they're going to do is send that request in, and then you're able to have a formula when you're breaking down how many copies, how long the text is, and really giving a quote and estimation for it. Something else in educational reprints and permissions could also be fan art. And I think that sometimes gets merged with merchandise, but a good thing about that is I know right now, romance and fantasy are doing really well. So anything that wants to make a bookmark, if they want to make a teacup, things like that, that can go under permission for a smaller type of Etsy shop, a boutique owner who wants to really kind of take the lead on that. And so you're licensing them a permission for maybe 2 or 3 years to sell merchandise under like your IP project. And there's nothing wrong with that. I know a lot of authors, they feel really in awe that someone wants to do it for them, but remember that it is your IP project. So you should be able to at least get a percentage of what they're making since they're making money off of it. Now, if they're just kind of selling it for free, then of course you're able to grant like a gratis type of permission for X amount of months or a year, but just making sure that if they are making money for it, you have every right to ask at least to put them on their contract and get some part of like the net profits or royalties. Next slide. Merchandise, which is one of my favorite things. And so when it comes to doing that, again, you see it a lot in more of like a t-shirt, a plushie doll. It could be anything. One of the things I have is this bookends that's behind me, and I have another one right here that I did this year with one of our clients at Bookends. So the merchandise company reached out, they're really excited for it, and they gave us some ideas for how they want to really expand the IP, the world, and go into detail. So they're making, and they'll use very niche things from your book. So if there's like a spyglass, they want to use that. A certain type of pen, a dagger. These bookends that have it, it's a pirate book. So we're able to use kind of that ship front as well as the back of the ship to really show what the book is about. Of course, the author's going to get credit, and then usually just has like your copyright on there. But when it comes to merchandise, you're able to get so many different things. I do see it a lot now in more adult fantasy, adult thriller, and then of course children's books that can be pajamas, that can be again plush dolls, that can be any type of merch item. And so I think these are something that you are able to really expand on when it comes to it. And that's something that you'll do like a bundle deal. So Barnes and Noble, a Lit Joy crate, a Merrymakers, they'll usually partner with it. And if they want to put it in a store like a Target, a TJ Maxx, something like that, they'll go back to the publisher, hopefully negotiate a deal to get a bulk sale of your books and then sell it together. Theater and live adaptation, it's really amazing because when you do get a request that comes in, it's, you know, a theater director who's working at either like a children's school or something along the same lines, and they're like, hey, we really love this book. For instance, when I worked at Writer's House, they want to do The Last Stop on Market Street, and they're going to have an adaptation for it. So usually the writer reaches out to you as well. They're going to want to write a script for it, and then as the author, you're able to have some consultation or to say like, hey, I just want to get a free ticket whenever you do decide to do the play, and they're able to negotiate. And there's 2 different types of deals for that. If you have one that's kind of like a one-off type of school thing and they want to do the play for maybe 3 nights, you're just really going to get maybe like a flat rate, maybe royalties. And then we have more of like a larger type of dramatic, like a publisher in theater. So like dramatic publishing, they do theaters where they buy like a book, they travel and tour all over, let's just say for the US. They're going to Chicago, they're going to Atlanta, they're going to Florida. And so what they're going to do is then pay you using the upfront advance, and then you get a part of the royalties based off of that box office. Then of course, just being able to do it like as an author, they'll probably invite you to like the opening show. And then things to kind of ask for is going to be how many shows, how many people are expecting, what areas do you want to go to. And it gets very niche when it comes to that. Finally, I think it's something that everybody kind of sees and wants to do, and that's going to be film and TV. And so these are some of the things that, of course, we see our book to film. And I think when it comes to film and TV, that is now kind of what everybody's saying, like, oh, I'm an author now, I've made it. And I think that while that is also the case, just realizing all that goes into getting a book to finally the stage. And that starts off with the film and TV option or shopping agreement. So when you do a film and TV option, that's going to be a producer, a network, a company coming over and licensing the rights for about 18 months, really so that they can see if they're able to, one, if anybody's interested in turning this into an adaptation, and who can we get attached to the project to kind of push it through. That can be an actor, that can be a showrunner, that can be a scriptwriter who has done X, Y, and Z things on maybe this network. And if that comes down to it and they want to do it, then they're going to actually purchase the rights. So this is kind of like the first time where you're going to see somebody purchasing the rights when it comes to your subsidiary rights, because everything before that would just be licensing the rights to them. So when they do decide to purchase it, that's when you're going to have a Netflix, a Hulu, a CBS now owning the rights to turn it into an adaptation. And of course, there's going to be two different tiers, one for a TV series, one for film and TV. And depending on how that vision works out, it's going to be which direction you want to lean on. There have been some producers that come in, hey, I release this more as a TV series. And as an author, you have the right to say, no, I prefer seeing this as like a feature film. And you just want to make sure that creative wise, you guys are on the same page when it comes to that. And I think you're able to see how many books really now are deriving from an IP from a novel. I think when it comes to that, a lot of producers, a lot of networks are looking for those concepts that start off in a book form, already have the audience that way, especially now that we're in streaming, they already know they have like a fan base kind of kicked in. And now it's kind of attaching that big name actor or actress, or even that showrunner to do it for you. And for me personally, it was something that now that I'm an agent, I started off with working at a writer's house as a Subrights associate. And for me, I really love every facet of the book stage. I know 20 years ago as an author, you would just say like me getting a book deal is a dream, but now being able to see how much your book is able to transform after that initial deal. I've seen some agents and some authors who have negotiated deals where they were able to really tick off 5 out of all their subrights, and they had no idea. So being able to really tap into those hidden gems of subrights, you're able to really see how people use their creativity now to expand on your IP project. Again, I love cross-team collaboration. So outside of working with the publisher, I'm working with film and TV companies, Scouts, I'm working with somebody in Portugal for translation rights, I'm working with Podium for audio, and just so many different areas. The versatility, because every subrights contract does have a different set of terms. Nothing's going to be the same. The term of license is going to be different. The royalties are different. The advance is different. So really being able to see which subright requires which attention to detail when it comes to what you're asking for. And then of course, sales focus. At the end of the day, as an author, you're trying to, of course, get your book out there, but also maximizing your profit. And so doing so, if you are able to retain more rights or even just sell it with the publisher, seeing how much money you can get as somebody who maybe wants to be a full-time author one day. Something that I really try to work for my clients for when it comes to talking about goals and where they want to be in 15, 20 years.
Thanks, Jenissa. Sarah, are you there? One second. Oh, here's Sarah.
My apologies, everyone. My AirPods were not working. So thank you so much, Jenissa. So I have some questions here that were sent beforehand, and then some that were sent during the panel. So the first one I'm just going to go into, and some of these are like consolidations of several questions that were received before the panel. So the first one is, how can a self-published author exploit subrights?
For a self-published author, usually the first thing they're going to try and sell is going to be audio rights. There are a lot of new audio publishers that are now looking for indie authors especially. So that's going to be the first thing. And I think tapping into those and figuring out that is going to be the next step to really now gaining that readership and then now going for maybe like an app type of print right. translation rights, then maybe if, once that kind of grows, trying to sell your backlist to a publisher, if that's your goal.
Thank you. How much of an advantage is it to sign with a literary agency that has a Subrights team or a Subrights specialist?
I think there's a huge advantage, but I think even just having, they don't have a person doing it, asking that agent, like, have you ever handled Subrights? There are a lot of agencies that are more boutique size. They don't have one person doing Subrights. But if you have someone who's been in the business for 20 years, who have seen every facet of a Subrights, you're going to be in great hands as well.
Mm-hmm. In the first slide you mentioned of this presentation, you mentioned agent retained rights. Someone's asking, are you saying that the agent owns those rights or they're retained on behalf of the author?
They're retained on behalf of the author. So when we're negotiating a deal with like HarperCollins, they'll send in a deal and say like, hey, I want to offer rights and we want to keep translation. Simultaneously saying that. And me as an agent on your behalf, if we think that we can sell translation rights for it, I'm going to try to negotiate so we can retain those rights, of course, on behalf of the author.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what subrights might you retain or exploit if you're a translator? Do you have any tips for authors hoping their work will get translated? And how do you find an agent to handle translation rights for a title? So that's just like a big translation question.
Well, I think definitely one translation, but that also depends on what language that translator is able to do. So if it's more of like French, of course, you want to retain all languages because that can be a separate fee, a separate advance payment for the translator in general. And that would be, I think I missed the second half of your question, but primarily would be the translation rights.
Yeah. And then any questions? And then how do you find an agent to handle translation rights for a title?
Well, that's supposed to be every agent's job. And so if they don't have a subrights department, again, just saying like, hey, how many foreign rights deals have you done? Even just aside from translation, how many deals have you done in the UK, in India, in Australia?
Yeah, so what you're saying is that it's the agent's responsibility to like essentially exploit, not just to exploit the rights, but to also manage the exploitation of the rights.
Definitely. And I think that is also a conversation that the agent's going to have, because depending on the country, the territory, even the book itself, it may not be in the best interest for them to even retain rights. There are some instances where you want to have the publisher just pay you an extra couple of $1,000s and just sell the rights on their own.
Right. Yeah. For example, like if a project, in my own experience, if a project is, let's say, particularly, geographically, let's say US centric, we do a lot of nonfiction at my agency, like we might be more open to having the publisher, take those rights just because we might not be able to exploit them like as well and just like sort of pocket that extra advance money up front. Okay, and then sort of on the film side, can you discuss the sort of co-agent and film agent process? So, and how do you discuss film and TV goals and rights with an agent who does not specialize? I'm reading this like from the box, so this like from the perspective of the author who wrote the question. But essentially, like, can you describe the co-agent and the film agent process?
Yeah, so I'll even back it up. So even when it comes to translation rights, we use co-agents who are on the ground running in Brazil, in Portugal, who speaks the language and able to really be the ones that are sending the books to publishers. Same thing for film and TV. So there's co-agents who are at CAA, UTA, and they're the ones that are really talking to showrunners on a weekly basis, talking to networks, talking to scouts. And so usually when that happens, we're going to really kind of co-rep that book when it comes to it. I'm still taking the front load when it comes to the primary deal of the publisher, and now that co-agent is the one sending it to scouts, Netflix, Hulu, things like that. And they're also going to be the ones that negotiate that deal for you.
Right. So what you're saying is that like even if sort of the agent themselves don't directly sort of negotiate film and TV, they should have a network of like scouts and film agents that they know, to be able to kind of connect you to that opportunity to actually exploit those subrights.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so what if a contract doesn't stipulate subrights? Can you assume that the author owns those subrights?
I try not to assume anything when it comes to a contract and book publishing, depending on where you are. But usually in most contracts, there's going to be a clear definition of the author retaining these type of rights. The publisher has the rights to exploit these. And if you do have a contract where that doesn't happen, I would say ask. And then once you get that clarified answer, make an amendment to the contract to make sure that there's a clear definition of who owns what, who's able to exploit what.
Right, exactly. And I think, further than that, like in my experience, you want a sort of a contract to lay out things as clearly as possible. I think, especially now people are talking about, or, the conversation, and I think there's a question about AI here actually, so I might tie that in, but, this idea of like, artificial intelligence is like a subright, or, NFTs from a few years ago. And I know that, some publishers would just like avoid even including that language sort of in the publishing contract to kind of give the publishers themselves some wiggle room in case like they find a way to exploit those rights like in the future, so like it's kind of in this weird gray space, which is not like a great experience, but sort of the sort of mentioning or not mentioning of subrights in a contract has a lot of power, and so you should also always like strive for clarity. Okay, any tips for a first-time author on what they can expect? Do debut authors have any negotiating power on this stuff? I think meaning subrights. Are there red flags or certain minimum percentages they should know for any important subrights?
I think percentages, I'll start from the bottom up. Percentage is hard based on kind of like what the percentage is. So I think I can't really throw out a number. And every subright's going to be different when it comes to royalties, when it comes to even time frame of the term of license. So I think it really is asking your agent just the industry standard. So hey, if we're doing this audio deal or doing a translation deal, what's that term of license look like on an industry standard, which means like majority of the contracts we negotiated at least with this bottom floor when it comes to it. And I think as a first time author, everybody has negotiating power at some point. So even when it comes to that first deal, hey, we really think we can sell this book in French or in German. Let's see if we can at least try to retain translation rights. And there's nothing wrong with asking. I think being able to have an agent who isn't afraid to actually negotiate too, is kind of the biggest thing.
Thank you. And here is the AI sort of related question. So how has generative AI changed anything for how you buy or sell translation rights? So this is a question about translation in particular, but I think we could talk like more broadly about AI. What are the most popular books being translated now? For some reason, that was put in the same question. So I guess it's kind of two different questions.
Yeah, for me, the most rights I see right now being translated are going to be romance and fantasy. I think just because there's no really kind of stipulation when it comes to that. Fantasy is worldwide and accessible, same thing as romance. So I think those are the easiest ones that are being translated. When it comes to AI, we haven't seen anything that kind of has hindered it when it comes to translation, just making sure it's in the contract of not using AI to, train your programs, not using AI when it still comes to a cover design. So usually the same things you're trying to ask for in a primary deal, we try to mirror that with our translation deals as well.
Okay, which subrights are negotiable and what is the current reality in publishing contracts?
Yeah, so every subright still is negotiable, similar to a publishing contract. Like she's always asking for better terms because I think in a sales negotiation, no one's going to come up and be like, hey, this is my best kind of offer. They're trying to figure out what they can take. So if it's film and TV, it might be shortening the term of license and getting certain royalties kind of carved out when it comes to the IP project. Same thing with audio and even when it comes to merchandise. Instead of doing it for like 5 years, maybe just doing it for 2 years, making sure you're really getting down to the nitty gritty of like you're only making t-shirts and pajamas, making sure it's non-exclusive. So it means that if you have 2 merchandise companies, you can do deals with both of them and not just exclusively give it to one company.
Okay. What would you say is the most overlooked subright that can be the most lucrative?
That permissions and fan art. I think I spend a little bit of time on that because I think when an Etsy shop owner, just saying that for example, comes to you, is like, hey, I want to make a t-shirt or a bookmark of your work, people get so excited and they're like, yeah, like go ahead, it's fine, just go ahead and do that. And they're not realizing how much money that Etsy shop owner could be bringing in on an annual basis if they are an LLC. So I think asking for, a 2-year term and X amount of royalties is really going to be able to do that. I've seen some people who are making off of fan art sometimes advanced prices when it comes to that.
Thank you. Let's see. I'm just reading this out. Somebody says, I'm currently beginning talks with a children's theater company. Will this path negatively or positively affect film and TV rights?
I would say it could be positively when it comes to it. It's just making sure that when it comes to the boilerplate language, making sure that you're able to kind of carve out those film and TV rights and make sure they don't have an issue if somebody comes along and wants to option it. Now, if a film and TV company comes afterwards, they might say theatrical and adaptation. So it might also help you because they usually want to keep those rights. If you already have a theater deal in place, they automatically have to carve it out now because you already have something pending and ongoing.
Sure. Somebody's asking or has asked, please elaborate on subrights with short story publications in literary journals.
Yeah, so I think on that aspect of it as well, I kind of asked what their subrights kind of boilerplate language is. I've never had much experience doing it with literary journals, but if they do have to really want to keep the content of the IP world, it might be harder for you to maybe turn it into a full-length novel and then exploit subrights later down the line, because technically that literary journal might say they own the IP project or already bought the rights to the IP project.
Okay. What are ways an individual author could use merchandising subrights, and what are the advantage over selling these rights? What are the advantages? Yeah.
What do they mean by merchandising subright? But not the actual merchandise subright, but are they saying like just licensing it rather than having someone buy it?
I think they mean like sort of retaining those rights and then exploiting them themselves instead of giving them to the publisher.
Yeah, so I think it depends again, like on the type of book. If you think that if you have a publisher who maybe wants to give you a split that isn't as favorable, and at this point Michael can jump in, but they want to give, maybe 50-50 when it comes to translation, and you're either used to seeing like an 80-20, but you can sell the book in translation in maybe Korea, China, France, you might want to hold on to those rights so you're not losing that 50-50 split when it comes to the royalties when it comes to that.
Mm-hmm. What is the time frame for publishers to hold the rights, and can they be non-exclusive? What if they don't sell anything? So yeah, I think the idea is that, are there some sort of time limits for some subrights that we license to the publishers, and what happens if the publishers don't exploit them?
Yeah, I think you can definitely ask. I think I see more of a reversion when it comes to audio rights. So if this audio right isn't exercised within 2 years of the publication date, the rights revert back to the author and the agency, and they're able to go sell it.
If a foreign publisher has bought translation rights, I'm now getting questions from the Q&A. If a foreign publisher has bought translation rights but hasn't yet translated the book well after its US release, is there anything an author can do to encourage the translation to happen?
Yes, I think I'd have to look at the contract though, because usually there is kind of a boilerplate language that says like the book has to be published within X amount of like months or years from like the contract signature. So I think that is a little more technical, but having your agent kind of follow up with you if you are indie author, then going in and re-looking at your contract to figure out if there is type of a reversion clause in there. They haven't published it yet.
Mm-hmm. Can you sell subrights on a self-published book?
Absolutely, and I encourage it. Usually as an indie author, translation rights can be your pot of gold, film and TV options, audio rights, of course, can be the first thing to go. So I think if you're especially getting that traction, the income's coming in, don't be afraid of it. If you just want to be an indie author, that's fine. But usually as well, if you have all these kind of subrights adding up, that's going to make a publisher want to really come in now and like repackage it and really push it for print rights.
Okay. So one question we have here is, can an author get more rights as a series grows, or is it more likely the split will continue forever? So I guess this is a situation where there are like multiple books in a series.
Yeah, so I think it depends on how many books is in that initial contract, because when it comes to like one book or the first 2 books, when it comes to publishers, that's the full term of copyright. But now if after the duology, there's another spin-off book or third or fourth, you can negotiate different splits or different even subsidiary rights for that new contract date.
Okay. Do you have any advice for renegotiating a contract to regain subrights when those rights have been licensed to the publisher?
If it comes to like a brand new contract, like a brand new book, it's just saying like, hey, I think now you have more of a leverage to retain those rights if you are an author. But again, sometimes if it makes more sense, they'll pay you the money if they don't want to hold on to it. So now if you say like, hey, we've made X amount of $1,000 in sub rights, I want that money now tacked onto my advance if I'm gonna give you these rights.
Okay. I'm just scrolling a little bit more through the Q&A here. One moment. Oh, this is an interesting one. How do publishers decide whether and when there is a market for other languages?
Yeah, well, they're asking on behalf of the publisher. I know I can only really speak from the agency point of view. But I know for us, as soon as we sell those primary rights, we're going to go off immediately and try to sell those sub rights. I don't think there's like a right time for the market. It's just now that this book is sold, usually when it comes to another language or a co-edition, they want to publish the book simultaneously. So now that we have maybe a countdown, a year and a half until the US book comes out, let's just see how many translations you can get to come out at the same time.
Okay. What would you recommend for an author publishing with a university press who's not working with an agent?
I think getting as much upfront info when it comes to like that contract and that boilerplate language, seeing who owns it, if you wanted to expand on this, if there are any subsidiary rights, where do they plan on like pitching it overseas, and also like having a UK type of thing when it comes to it. I think literary journals are a little bit different and stickier when it comes to subsidiary rights because usually they're not doing different editions and formats and things like that, but still at least carving out anything that any subright that can maybe come about this that the author retains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find for university presses, you can really only expect them to exploit like, print, audio, like ebook, the sort of three main podcasts. Well, podcasts too, maybe. I was gonna say, I'm always thinking of, it's an interesting actually, and that's not one of the questions, so I don't want to take away from the questions that have come through, but one other situation that, sort of the industry has run into, not like, let's say in the last couple of years, but like in the last 5 years is this weird middle ground between like podcast and audiobook where, it's one of those things where the publisher will not exclusively like say that sort of the podcast rights stay with the author, but like the author is also not licensing podcasts to the publisher. They wanted to stay in this like gray middle ground where they say like, oh, they wouldn't want the podcast to, let's say, compete with the audiobook if the audio has been licensed to the publisher, for example. Okay. Someone's asking, as a first-time small press author with no agent, is it a given that I should get an agent in order to best access subrights opportunities?
I think if that's your goal, and I think also when it comes to that, I've had people who are indie authors, small press authors, and say like, "Hey, I just want to work with you for subrights." So I have a couple clients I only do subrights for because they're more in the indie space. They have no interest of being traditionally published, but I'm still able to work with them on translation, audiobook deals, things like that for their self-published series.
Mm. And just scrolling through some where there hasn't been any overlap with what we've discussed. Somebody's asking which audiobook company is looking for indie author fiction, and is there a specific genre that sells? So like maybe tips for audiobook companies that work a lot with indie authors.
Yeah, so Amazon Publishers, their audiobook division does a lot because they self-publish a lot of indie authors, Dreamscape, Blackstone on a good day.
Somebody's asking, a producer for Hallmark and Lifetime Films is interested in adapting my book to one of their films, but from what I read in online forums, there may be very little advantage monetarily or reputation-wise for an author. What can you tell us about such a situation?
Well, yes, I think when it comes to optioning a book, and that's that first stage before Hallmark decides to purchase the book, they may not be a huge mark when it comes to like how much you're able to get in the initial option advance, but make sure you're looking for the purchase price. So how much they're actually going to buy the rights to produce it, making sure that's, I don't want to throw numbers out there, but you feel like you're getting the right amount of money for it. Anything over $100,000, for instance, if it's like a Hallmark, I think that's a good place to start. And I think you're able to negotiate it because they do want your books. trying to get consultation credits when it comes to the script, trying to get EP credits, so you are an executive producer, making sure they're putting based on a book by John Doe on the opening credits and not the ending credits, so people know to at least go buy your book afterwards.
Maybe perhaps it would be good for us to talk a little bit about like, in terms of option agreements, like sort of the difference, let's say, between the option fee and the purchase price and, the length of those times and let's say the option periods. And, like applicable fees, non-applicable fees, just so that, I think that, for somebody who's not sort of well-versed in that, it can be kind of a weird, it's like one of the weirder subrights, option agreements especially are kind of unusual.
Yeah, definitely. So usually an initial option can be anywhere from 12 months to 18 months, and that system lessen the rights exclusively. So that means you can't shop it to any other network or producer at that same time while they're trying to either attach a showrunner, a writer, or even just kind of like a big network or producer on there. And so in that option fee, that can be anywhere from $500, and I've seen all the way up to $50,000. And so they're paying for those exclusive rights. And usually the first time option fee is going to be the one that is going to be applicable to the purchase price. They're able to deduct it from that overall overarching amount. And the second one is like, it's not going to go towards it. So that's money in your pocket. Usually you're going to have 1-2 option periods, and there might be like an option extension, meaning like, hey, it's been 2 terms of 12 months, but we still are still looking for somebody to kind of buy it yet. We don't want to lose the book because we still love it. And we put in X amount of hours on it. We have a script ready. Let's go ahead and extend it one more time. And so usually at that point, you're able to ask for meaningful development, a pitch deck, who have you talked to at this point in time, and then now they're able to extend it. Now, when it comes to a purchasing price, now you're putting more into, okay, like if this book is to get bought by a Netflix or Hulu, how much are they able to pay for it? And I've seen anywhere from a floor to $100,000 all the way up to $1 million when it comes to purchasing it, depending on it. And I think it also gets kind of confusing and muddled whether if they want to make it into like a TV series, if they want to do like a feature film. So when they do want to make it into like a TV series, now you're paying for, okay, tier 1, if it's on Netflix, Hulu, HBO. Tier 2 is on more of like a Peacock, something else that has like less streaming of a fan base. How long are the episodes? Is it going to be 30 minutes? Is it going to be 60 minutes or 45 minutes of commercials? How many series are you going to do it? Is it going to be a flat fee and royalties? So I think it does get kind of messy, but just making sure that when you are talking to that initial producer, they have a clear vision of it, because it's different rights when it comes to a TV series and it's different rights for when it comes to a film and TV, like actual film.
Right, but and so that means that when a sort of production company or producer decides to option your work, it doesn't necessarily mean that the book is going to end up being adapted into a film. Like, in fact, perhaps a book might be optioned several times over the course of many years and actually never get made into like a film or TV show. And you just keep kind of gathering these option fees every few years, like little acorns in your cheeks. But it's like a nice source of like, just like it's, as a subrights income stream, it keeps on giving, or can keep on giving, just getting all of these little option fees. All right, I am scrolling here. And it's good to keep like getting questions. Oh, somebody's asking, if an agent offers representation, but they don't tell me anything about subrights, are they the right agent, or is there a kind of trap somewhere?
I don't think that's a trap. I think as the author, you have the right to ask. It could be the agent was really nervous on the call and just forgot to touch on that subject of subrights. So after the call, you can say like, hey, we never talked about subrights. What are your thoughts about it? How do you exercise it? Does your agency have a specific person that does it? Don't be afraid. And I think just because they don't mention it doesn't mean they've never done it before or don't know how to.
Mm-hmm. Although the answer to those questions would definitely, pose a sort of yellow or red flag if they gave a sort of less than clear answer about what the agency's practice is in terms of exploiting those rights. Somebody asks, what if you do not have an agent, but a contract from a small publisher that wants all rights as part of the contract? Which ones do you let go of if you can?
I would say translation rights, because if it's a smaller press for them financially, it might not make sense for them to offer on a book and pay you X amount of dollars and not keep rights. But I think usually when it comes to film and TV, merchandising rights, usually the author is always able to retain those. So I usually see translation and audio the first rights to go to the publisher, but you're able to retain theater, merch, and film and TV.
Mhm. Oh, that's a good question, actually. I recently learned that publishers often get world rights for picture books, and then sales of foreign rights are put toward the author's advance. Could you explain the specifics of how that works and what portion of those sales typically go toward the advance?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just say you did a book with Simon & Schuster again, and they're going to give you an advance of $10,000, and they're keeping all those rights. Let's just say that so far in your advance for the book was published, you've only earned $5,000. So they sell translation rights to France, you get $1,000 advance payment. That's going to go towards, after they're split, the rest of it is going to go towards your advance when it comes to that overarching $10,000. So that's why when it comes to that real difference between an agency like Bookends retaining those rights and a publisher is you're getting a separate advance when it comes to it. So it's the $10,000 that you already got from Simon & Schuster, plus you get to keep that $1,000 after the agency commission comes out straight into your bank account. It doesn't go towards the royalties of that book publisher.
Yeah, and sort of until the book advance earns out, all subsidiary rights income goes towards earning back the advance. Yeah, I should say in response to this question, it doesn't just happen for picture books. It happens for all books where the publisher, has retained those or sort of licensed those rights from the author. Um, Oh, somebody's asking, I'm planning on creating an online training course that has my book embedded in it. How would that work if the publisher had the rights or if they didn't?
I guess I need to know more about like the platform and what you're using it to train for. If it comes like like in some type of AI, like I know now I just negotiated a deal where it's like the publisher saying we don't use AI, you can't use AI either for any type of like IP project when it comes to like this book they're purchasing. But I want to know more about that, because when it does come to a publisher, you're selling like the lifetime of copyright, the IP project for it. So it can't really be, you still kind of keep rights and you're using it to either make income off of it, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, in my experience, working in nonfiction, especially where much of the authors, what the author writes about in their book has something to do with like their existing platform. Or perhaps if they're like, creating online courses or something like that. I think, yeah, the sort of key part of the question is like embed, so does that mean that the full text, it's like sort of the text, more than even like the idea, like how much of the text itself would be embedded sort of in the online training course. And the person who asked this also said the contract's still being negotiated, so that's definitely something that would need to sort of be stipulated very clearly in the contract, that it's being used sort of for an online training course. Somebody asked, do authors have a say of the subrights, especially in film and TV show and translation?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? My Wi-Fi.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
that's all right. The question is, do authors have a say of the subrights, especially in film and TV and translation?
I say it's like where they want it to be sold, if it's like a country.
I believe that is the essence of the question.
Yeah, I think always know, like as an author, you have the right to walk away from a deal. So if it's like a UK deal, for instance, and you just didn't really feel comfortable with the editor, you just didn't like where it's being sold, you can definitely say, no, I'm not interested in that deal and just decline that offer. Same thing for a primary deal. You don't have to take the first advance, and same thing as the agent. And same thing for film and TV. If you see your book mostly wanted to be a limited series, but they want to come in as a feature film, you don't have to option your rights to them. You can still hold on to it.
Mhm. Although in the case, let's say where the publisher has translation, they don't, I mean, the publisher will usually sort of run it by you and be like, how do you feel about it? But they technically do have the right to license those
Yeah.
translations without necessarily like consulting or at least getting your sort of approval. Let's see. Just scrolling here. Oh, somebody actually asked a question in response to our conversation about podcast subrights. So the question is, what does that cover? So podcast subrights, is it that if you host the podcast or if you're a guest, for example, on somebody else's podcast?
Yeah. So like you said, like what is that IP form? So let's say you wrote a book and it's either nonfiction or even fiction, and you have all those elements and sold it to a publisher. You can't now go on the podcast and like break down kind of everything and like retell the story on a podcast without like carving those rights out for it. So podcast rights, same thing, kind of like similar to audiobooks and audio narration when it comes to it. So it's kind of like licensing those rights to a podcaster when it comes to the format of that book.
Thank you. Just scrolling. Somebody's asking if an author wanted to allow some fans to use the IP, but not Etsy shops, or go down the slippery slope of foregoing royalties on future merchandise, what is the best way to go about it?
If they don't want the opportunity, like they just sell the art and they're like, I don't.
So they want to allow some fans to use the IP, but not Etsy shops. And they also don't want to like forego royalties on future merchandise. What would the best way to go about it be?
I think you still decline an offer. We have a merchandise deal that came in, and based off of the client's brand and what she saw from the owner, even anything at Etsy, she decided to say no. And I think thanks so much for reaching out for the opportunity. We're not interested at this time.
Mhm. Mm. Oh, interesting. This is like a less sort of author-oriented question, but I think it is from a different side. Someone's asking if someone's interested in working in a subrights department, what makes for a good application? The person asking has a background in law and contracts, and they're a writer. And so perhaps because of your presentation, this feels like an appealing job.
Yeah, so I think really can be anybody who's interested in even just learning about civil rights. But of course, if you have experience reviewing contracts, negotiating, let's just say you know how to speak 3 languages, you might want to go over and do like the translation role and being another person. I think it just starts off with being an interest. When I got into the role, I kind of first rejected it. I was like, I don't know what civil rights is. I want to be an agent. But then learning more about it, I was able to kind of come in.
Yeah, so interesting clarification there that a person can work in subrights sort of on both the publisher and the agent side, and that sort of especially, I mean, I would imagine, it's rather like interchangeable, so they say sort of on the editorial side that like once you're sufficiently advanced being like, let's say an editor or an agent, you wouldn't really want to go, on different sides. But I think that like as a subrights person, you could probably transition quite easily between publisher and agency. Somebody just asked for film rights. Can authors become the screenwriter, producer, or director? If yes, for screenwriting, is it required to get another agent who specializes in scripts?
Yeah, so you don't have to get another agent, but let's just say you already are a scriptwriter and you've written on these 3 different shows, or you did this adaptation for film and TV. That's a great way to get your foot in the door and let them know that you also want to do that, and a way to get you more money. Because even as for EP credit or consultation credits, being in the writing room is going to be a separate contract. But also the other side of it is if you sell it to like a Netflix or somebody, I'm just using Shonda as an example. I don't know Shonda Rhimes or what she wants to do. They might already have type of a situation for their writer's room and they might not be open to it. But you could get money for writing the pilot series, for example, or even doing like consultation when it comes to it.
I would say that there are some, at my literary agency, we don't represent, screenwriters or screenplays. So in some situations, you might need to get sort of a different agent for that. But if it's something connected to like the underlying IP, as opposed to like sort of a new screenplay, that's like something different, and it should be something that your literary agent can at least like help you with, if not outright represent you on. Okay. I'm just going back through the questions. Somebody just asked if your agency already has a film rights division for film, documentaries, etc. How would that work as opposed to a film agency approaching?
Yeah, so I think it's always great to have an in-house person that's able to do it, but a lot of times you still might want to default. Even though I work on Subrights, I paired one of my clients with a film and TV co-agent because that's their primary 9-to-5 job. It's talking to Netflix, talking to Hulu, things like that. I think it's just important to have somebody working in Subrights, even just an agent that's dealt with having to negotiate a film and TV option. That way they're not having to hire a contract or just don't know what terms to really look for. But I think you still want somebody to at least manage those things. So I prefer to have a film and TV co-agent, but if we're not able to pair a project and the opportunity comes along, I at least know how to negotiate it.
Yeah, I think there's like sort of the underlying question as well of like how that works, sort of the process of like, let's say working with an agency that has a film and TV rights division versus like, let's say being like the process of like pairing with a co-agent, either sort of that film TV co-agent approaching, or you actually going out and trying to find a film or TV co-agent.
Yeah, definitely. So I think when it comes to like what my role is at Bookends, if we know that we want to keep rights and we kept let's film and TV options, I can go to a CA, ETA, pitch those books towards them. Or let's just say your book was announced on Publishers Marketplace. Now you're going to have a lot of film and TV interest sometimes, translation interest, and they'll come to you, the primary agent. If that primary agent wants the Subrights department to handle it, they'll pass you over to me and I'll reach out and be that middle person, that liaison when it comes to negotiating that deal or pairing that co-agent with it. Or your primary agent could be the one to respond and say, hey, rights are available. Here's the manuscript. Any other questions, you can either defer it to me or Jenissa, and we'll take care of it.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, Johnny, I see you've reappeared, so I think we're coming on time.
Yeah, we're coming up on time. If there's another question, that's great. But I wanted to go ahead and say thank you. You've covered so much, Jenissa. Thank you, Sarah. We have a ton of unanswered questions, but please know that the Authors Guild always reviews the unanswered questions. It helps us produce future programs. Might be months before we get to it, but we'll do what we can. But also feel free to email in staff@authorsguild.org with questions. And if you're a member, a professional member, you can send in our legal help form for personalized assistance. Well, this is actually the last in this season of Agent Talks with AALA, Literary Agents of Change, and the Authors Guild. But we'll start up in the fall probably with this or something very similar. So we're looking forward to that. We've covered editing with your agent, just book contract basics of publishing contracts, and a lot of other things. So you can search Agent Talks or look in the resources tab of our website. Those are free and available to the public, not just for Guild members. So it's great stuff. Thank you both for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night. Bye-bye.